To be honest, I thought after I released my 2 videos on Nolan's Odyssey that I would be done commenting on this film and the surrounding discourse, and that I could move on to making videos on other topics I am interested in. But I was wrong. I saw The Odyssey over 2 weeks ago during its first weekend in theaters, and since then the online discourse surrounding the ahistorical, anachronistic, racially diverse cast has not died down. In the weeks since the film's release, people on X and in various outlets have decided to make low IQ commentary on race in the ancient Mediterranean in order to defend the racially diverse casting, and oh my god, is it mind-numbingly moronic. Basically, the arguments boil down to assuming that Northern Europeans and Black Africans are equally racially distinct from the Greeks, pointing out that the ancient Greeks knew who the Ethiopians were, and imposing a first grader's understanding of geography onto ancient Mediterranean trade. Seriously, that is the level of argumentation we are dealing with here. Naturally, because I grew frustrated with the low-resolution, simplistic arguments being made about ancient Greece and the wider Mediterranean, I had to make a video debunking all of this slop. The debate about the Odyssey casting controversy unsurprisingly ended up on Piers Morgan, where a panel that included Critical Drinker, Victor Davis Hanson, and Mark Lamont Hill, among others, had a lively discussion.
Daniel Mendelsohn, one of our other panelists here, penned a column for the New York Times entitled, "Does Matt Damon Look Greek? No, so stop complaining about LupitaNyongo." In it,
as was just stated by Piers, one of the other panelists, Daniel Mendelsohn, wrote a piece for the New York Times called "Does Matt Damon Look Greek? No, so stop complaining about LupitaNyongo." The fact that he wrote this was perplexing because Mendelsohn has a PhD in classics and is also a translator, so he should know that 1. Homer never refers to Helen of Troy as an Ethiopian, and 2. The ancient Greeks spoke an Indo-European language, so by extension are an Indo-European people, and Matt Damon is descended from Indo-Europeans. This means Matt Damon and Northern Europeans in general share more recent common ancestry with the Greeks than Black Africans. More broadly speaking, Matt Damon and the ancient Greeks are both West Eurasian. Meanwhile, LupitaNyongo is sub-Saharan African, making her very distinct from all populations descended from the out-of-Africa bottleneck, including West Eurasians. This broader second point should be blatantly obvious to anyone who knows even the slightest bit about population genetics and archaeogenetics. Mendelsohn is not the only one who made this argument. There have been many other journalists and writers who have parroted this same talking point about the casting of Matt Damon being as inaccurate as the casting of LupitaNyongo. Let me reiterate, because this is so simple, and I don't know how all these online defenders of the racially diverse Odyssey cast can't grasp this. While Matt Damon is not Greek or Southern European, he is at least West Eurasian. The ancient Greeks were West Eurasian, so his casting is nowhere near as egregious as LupitaNyongo or TravisScott or that East Asian dude. Various articles and X users are continuing to also make the same tired argument of, it's a myth, there's a cyclops and witches, who cares? Which I already refuted in one of my previous videos. If you thought these pro-racially diverse Odyssey articles were bad, wait until you see the low IQ slop posted on X. I even had to respond to some of these retards and debunk their idiocy, such as this guy right here claiming the ancient Greeks were closer to Africans than to Anglo-Saxons. It's statements such as these that make it painfully obvious that these people don't actually care about archaeogenetics, archaeology, or ancient history. They only care about defending their ideology, leftism in the culture war, and in doing so, they are willing to pull the most brain-dead, moronic shit out of their ass without doing any research. I responded to him on X, writing, quote, "No they weren't. Here are 2 genetic proximity heat maps for the Mycenaean Greeks. The maps are measuring genetic distance of the Mycenaeans to modern populations. Regions/populations on the map that are red are the closest to the Mycenaeans, while dark blue populations are the farthest or most genetically distant. Orange, yellow, and green are in the middle. The map shows that Mycenaeans are genetically closer to the Saxons than they are to sub-Saharan Black Africans." Again, this should be very simple to anyone who has read even a little bit about genetics, human evolution, and the out-of-Africa migrations. The Saxons and the Greeks are both descended from out-of-Africa migrants, and they are both West Eurasian with Proto-Indo-European admixture, meaning Saxons are genetically closer to the ancient Greeks than Black Africans are. But wait, there are so many more brain-dead tweets such as this. I'll only give a few more examples to make my point. Here we have someone complaining about Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra in the famous 1963 film, stating, "Cleopatra didn't look like this, but nobody complained." First off, Ron, did you seriously think this was a witty retort to the criticism of the Odyssey casting? You sound like a moron. The worst part being you were attempting to be witty while being completely wrong about Cleopatra, so never try that again. Let me make it very simple for you, Ron. Cleopatra was Greco-Macedonian, so she would have recent common ancestry with Elizabeth Taylor, and therefore would not have looked very different from her. I responded to this tweet basically saying the same thing. I have a video from a few years ago where I addressed the Cleopatra race controversy in more detail, so if you guys are interested, you can watch that. Then we get to the tweets that argue essentially because the ancient Greeks knew about the Ethiopians, and there are a few mentions in the Homeric poems, therefore it is historically accurate to cast LupitaNyongo and TravisScott. Seriously, that is the level of argumentation we are dealing with. These people are seriously morons, and they don't even know anything about ancient history or archaeology. If they did, they would realize that 1. Ethiopians were seen as a foreign and exotic people by the Greeks, and 2. The Ethiopians were still considered barbarians by the Greeks, just as the Scythians were, just as the Persians were, and just as the Northern Europeans were, because they were foreigners who did not speak Greek. Most importantly, there were not a bunch of Ethiopians walking around in Mycenaean or classical Greece. The ancient Mediterranean was not the Dominican Republic, New York City, or Los Angeles. By far the worst of these morons online are the ones who make the argument that ancient Greece had more interaction with Africa than with Northern Europe, because they are really stupid midwits who think they actually know something about ancient Mediterranean trade, all while invoking an overly simplistic geography. And even worse, they leave out the voluminous archaeological evidence of the ancient Greeks interacting with Northern Europeans, specifically Celtic Europe. Here is a tweet that is an example of the low-resolution geography that these people are using. The user parrots the same talking point about Ethiopia being mentioned in Homeric poems, which, once again, I would like to point out that the Greeks being aware of the existence of Ethiopians does not mean a bunch of black Africans were living in the Bronze Age Mediterranean, as is depicted in Nolan's Odyssey. This ex-user also cites the lotus eaters being in Tunisia as evidence of the Greeks' extensive interaction with Africa. I should have addressed this earlier in the video, but first I want to ask these people what they mean when they say African, or talk about Greek interactions with Africa, because as a cultural or ethnic category, African is meaningless since Africa is a giant continent. So I reject quote-unquote African as a useful category. To address the second example this user brought up, there are massive cultural and genetic differences between North Africans and Sub-Saharan Africans, so attempting to lump them together under one category of African in order to defend casting black Africans in Nolan's Odyssey doesn't really work. Here are some other examples of people on X pretending to know something about ancient Mediterranean trade or archaeology. This person right here claims that ancient Greeks had far more interactions with Africans than Germanic barbarians of the north. We also have another person I responded to, who oddly enough deleted his tweet, but was basically arguing the same thing. Look at how close Greece is to Africa, and there was trade between Greeks and Africans. First off, once again, there is a massive difference between North Africans and Sub-Saharan Black Africans. Second, he says Germanic barbarian to allow himself plausible deniability, when he knows the debate is about casting Northern Europeans, broadly speaking, versus Black Africans. But regardless, the ancient Greeks did have interactions with other Northern European groups such as the Celts. If you look at specifically Latin, which by the way was a pretty sophisticated Iron Age Celtic culture, it is clear that the ancient Greeks had a big influence on this Celtic culture. Any archaeologist who specializes in Iron Age Europe will tell you that the Iron Age Celts borrowed substantially from the Greeks in the realm of culture and traded regularly with them. The Iron Age Celts also had cultural exchange and traded with the Etruscans, another classical Mediterranean culture that was the predecessor to the ancient Romans. I should also talk about the two hilltop fortresses in southwest Germany, Huneberg and Hohenasberg. These two sites have many Greek imports, including pottery and bronze vessels for serving wine, clearly not Celtic in origin. In fact, it seems the Celtic aristocracy adopted the Greek habit of drinking wine. At Huneberg, archaeologists have found evidence of Greek influence in the architecture of the fort itself. The fortification wall is made of mud brick with limestone foundations, with rectangular towers at regular intervals, which closes one side of the site. This is all to say that the ancient Greeks absolutely made contact with Northern Europe or Celtic Europe, and there was clearly trade and cultural exchange between the Greeks and the Iron Age Celts, especially Latin. I would also like to bring up that the modern descendants of the Iron Age Celts are the English, Irish, Welsh, and French. So if we are going to base casting off of which cultures the Greeks had contact with, well, maybe casting English or Irish actors can be justified. As for the other people on X who like to bring up how the ancient Greeks had colonies in North Africa like Cyrene, let me remind you the Greeks literally had colonies in France and Spain, you absolute morons. There was an important Greek colony in southern France called Massilia, which is known today as the French city of Marseille. There were other Greek colonies in France, or what was known as Gaul in antiquity, such as Taro Antion, Olbia, and Nice. Not to mention there were nearby settlements that became Hellenized as a result of the Greek presence nearby. Clearly, Celtic Europe was not cut off from the classical Mediterranean at all. Rather, the Iron Age Celts benefited from trade and cultural exchange with the Greeks and Etruscans. So these illiterate dolts citing Greek colonies in North Africa, or more broadly Greek interactions with North Africa, are either being extremely dishonest by leaving out the Greek colonies in France along with the trade and cultural exchange with the Celts, or more likely, they don't actually know anything about the ancient world and are citing factoids they found online in order to score points for their tribe. So that's all I have to say about the discourse online over the past few weeks when it comes to the Odyssey casting controversy. Hopefully you guys at least got something out of this video, maybe even learned a thing or two about the Iron Age Celts. Until next time.